Retro.
Hello there. This is James Arnold Taylor, the voice of Obi-Wan Kenobi, and whenever I'm in this part of the galaxy, I listen to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. Makes flying a little more tolerable. Don't tell Anakin.
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And this episode features the next installment of our The Clone Wars rewatch. But before we get into that, Jay, you want to go ahead and remind everybody what we got going on social media?
Absolutely. We've always got it going on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust.
All right. The digital line, the signal's boosted to maximum output. The shield is down. We are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So to pull back the curtain for just a second before we get into the discussion, Jay and I are recording this episode in advance. I don't know exactly when I'm going to publish it because we've got stuff going on the next couple weeks. And so we're recording a couple episodes tonight. I want to space them out so you'll have some fresh content. May try to air some additional episodes that are rebroadcasts of previous episodes, but we'll see what my schedule allows as we go through it. So yeah, this may not be showing up on your feed when you would expect it to. So I hope you can bear with us here and give us a week or two to get back on schedule. So with that having been said, we're going to be discussing episode 14 from season 3 of the Clone Wars, which is called Witches of the Mist, which I'm not really sure is a great title for this episode of all things, but we'll get into that in a bit. Jay, you want to go ahead and get us started with a summary of the episode?
Sure thing. The Jedi retrieve security footage from Savage Oppress's attack on the temple on Deveron and send Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker to track him down. After a tense meeting with the Nightbrothers on Dathomir, they learn from Mother Talzin that Savage is on Tordaria. Dooku has sent Savage there to capture King Katuunko and bring him back alive. Obi-Wan and Anakin arrive during Savage's attack and confront him. During the fight, Katuunko is killed and Savage escapes. Angry with Savage's failure, Dooku begins to punish him when Ventress arrives and a three-way fight ensues. There is no clear winner, and everyone escapes. Back on Dathomir, Savage Oppress seeks guidance from Mother Talzin, and she sends him in search of his brother Maul.
Indeed. So what do you think about this episode overall?
Oh, so good. I mean, we've been laying the groundwork for this over the last couple of weeks, and it's just, there's so much great action in this. Lots of great mystique. There's some fun stuff that I can't wait to discuss with you about Mother Talzin specifically, and just some things that hit me after rewatching this. And, even though this isn't something that has a whole lot of real dialogue to it, it sure does tell a good story.
Yeah. I like this one as well. I talked last week and the week before about how much I enjoy this arc and how nostalgic it is for me, the way I first experienced it. But one of the things that occurred to me is that we got a little bit of Anakin and Obi-Wan 2 weeks ago, and now we're getting more of them with this episode. And after they have taken a back seat for most of the season, it was really fun to get to see them not only in action, but in action together and kind of get that banter that they've got going on in a couple places. So that's one of the things I appreciate about this. As I just said a second ago, I'm not sure the Witches of the Mist is perhaps the best title for this episode, because yes, the witches are in it, but I would have thought, one of the last 2 episodes would have been a better, that would have been a better name for maybe switching out last week for this week and calling this one Monster. I mean, Savage is the big part of either one of them, but the witches were more involved last week and they were more involved the week before. And so I guess you got to call it something, but I feel like it's not exactly the best title for this episode.
No, I was going to say the same thing when you brought that up, that it would have been better to flip-flop it and call this one Monster personally. And yeah, that's a good call for sure.
So right off the top, this whole thing starts with some commandos, Republic commandos, delivering the bodies of the 2 Jedi that Savage killed at the Devaronian temple. And they are the commandos from the Republic Commandos game.
Yes.
And I know before you jumped on, you were watching the featurette about that. And Dave Filoni was talking about how much he liked that game, and this was an opportunity to bring them in. I'm not sure what it was about this episode that necessitated it be the entry point for the Commandos, especially since I can't remember. I know we see them in the Bad Batch, but do we ever see them again in the Clone Wars?
I want to say there's at least one other episode where we do, but maybe that's just my own headcanon
Mm-hmm.
because I love them so much myself that
Yeah.
I would hope that I would see them more than once. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I guess that says something. I mean, I've watched the Clone Wars multiple times, and I cannot recall another instance in this. So whatever their appearance is, maybe just wasn't that memorable. But they were able to devote the time to developing the assets to have the commandos in this episode because everything else that they needed, which was new, was pretty much created for the prior 2 episodes. So they had that leftover development space to make them, and they kind of at the last minute decided to insert them there on Dave's whim, which is cool. But it just was it was interesting to me that after that, I would have expected to see them more over the course of the season, and we just don't. So
Yeah, especially like you said, since they developed the assets for them. But it was good because they had the maquettes to use as well. And I love the fact that Dave talked about how he reached out to the developers of the video game to
yeah.
help them with some of the details and things. But as soon as Boss and Fixer came off that ramp, I was like, oh my gosh, Delta Squad. Started singing Vode on, in my head every time. As soon as you see those visors that are just lit up blue, it's just so perfect.
Right. So now that they've got the fallen Jedi delivered to them, Obi-Wan gets called into the Jedi Council chamber with him for a meeting with Yoda and Mace Windu, where they are reviewing the security footage from that temple, and he sees the image of Savage, but he mistakes it for Maul at first, and he's shocked. He says, "I killed him," earlier, and one of the things that's kind of noted is that he knows Maul's name. Well, no one ever told him his name during the Phantom Menace, so it kind of is a Occam's razor. How would they know it? Well, the Nymodians that they captured would have known who Maul was and what he was called. So, but that also kind of begs the the question: why did the Nymodians say anything about Sidious at that point? But
True. Probably too afraid to.
Yeah, but then they basically tell him he's going to be tracking Savage down, and Anakin's going to go with him. But we had the conversation a little bit last week about some of the confusing history about the Nightsistrs, the Nightbrothers, the Zabrak, and everything else. And they touch on that just a little bit here in this episode, where Obi-Wan says, he was under the belief that Maul was from Iridonia, which is where the Zabrak come from. But then Yoda corrects him and tells him that he was raised on Dathomir. And they just kind of leave it at that, which almost throws like another wrench in this, that the Nightbrothers aren't even native to Dathomir at all. They're brought in from Iridonia. So
Right. Yeah, they're almost farmed out, to Dathomir from Iridonia. And so you almost wonder if the Nightsistrs have their own little, crops out there, so to speak, of Nightbrothers that they draw from.
Further conflicting that is when they get to Dathomir, Obi-Wan and Anakin, and they go to the Nightbrothers village, and they're not happy to see them. Viscus, the leader, Anakin jumps up on that platform and puts a saber to his throat, basically to get the Nightbrothers to back off. And Viscus says that Savage Oppress is not there, that one of the Nightsistrs came and took him from this village as a mate.
Mm-hmm.
Very clearly says mate. So,
Yes.
it's just when you feel like you got this figured out, they start confusing it a little bit. So, I don't know. Maybe it is as simple as what we said last week, where they aren't ever going to give us a clear answer, and that's fine because they want the mystery to be there. But I did find that interesting.
Well, I think the whole reason why Viscus thought that Savage was taken as a mate was because why else would they're not going to tell them what the true reason is that, oh, there's the Sith and he wants a new apprentice. And so we're looking, you know what I mean? So it's
Oh, I'm
probably
not
just sort
confused
of,
about that part of it at
yeah,
all.
yeah,
No,
yeah.
no, no. It's just the whole, where do the Nightbrothers come from? In one
Mhm.
moment, we're being told that they were imported from Iridonia, and the next thing we know, we got a Night Sister pulling on for a mate. Well, for
Mhm.
what end in that case? So,
Yeah.
um, you know,
Imported from Iridonia. It sounds like a fine wine.
right. But so they're native or they're not. But again, they're just not going to give us any answers on that,
Right.
which is fine.
Yeah. And stepping back for just a second, I
Mhm.
also thought it was interesting. It piqued my ears a little bit when they were talking about how the bodies of the two Jedi were brought back for evaluation.
Mhm.
And so it made me think about how I'm sure, things like autopsies and whatnot, but I thought to myself, right away, that's why they can tell whether or not something was, or someone, I should say, was killed or hurt by a lightsaber versus a different weapon versus a blaster versus, you know what I mean? So I'm
Yeah.
sure that they train and that kind of thing. So it was just interesting to hear them say that and then to say, what could have done this? Well, a reckless, impulsive animal did this. That it wasn't, you could tell it wasn't a refined attack,
Right.
that it was just full out carnage.
Yeah. Savage and brutal. So,
Savage and brutal.
indeed. One of the things that stood out to me, and backing up another step, is when the Commandos arrived on Coruscant at the Jedi Temple. It was raining, and that was one of the other things that Dave Filoni mentioned during the featurette was that they were setting up the scene, the solemn moment with the bodies being returned in the rain, and they went to lengths to create that rain and stuff like that. Except for nobody got wet in it.
Mhm.
They showed the rain like bouncing off their uniforms and their heads and stuff like that, and they did a great job with that. But it's not like anybody's clothes got droopy because they lost the starch because they got rain. No one's hair was getting matted or anything. So um yeah, not a big deal, but it was just one of those things where they voted so much assets, I think, to the Commandos that they really didn't have time to make it look like everyone was standing out in the rain.
Sure. Yeah, and Dave was talking about how the Clone Wars and Reign have not really gotten along. So I guess this is baby steps. They
Indeed.
they were able to do a little bit, but maybe not as much as they needed to.
Yeah. One of the other things that gets featured in this episode is Dooku's attempt to train Savage Oppress. And when we first see them doing this, they're in his palace on Sereno, and Savage has one of those, well, what turns out to be a double blade lightsaber, but it's an enormous hilt, and he uses one side of it and basically clumsily attacks Dooku, who just dances out of his way, parries, disarms him, and then uses the Force to get both lightsabers and does a you know scissor across type thing with a lightsaber at Savage's throat. Basically he just didn't kill Savage. Was what happened to him in Revenge of the Sith.
Mhm.
When Anakin got the two lightsabers there, and then later he's got him outside, and he's trying to get him to tap into his anger and fear and hatred to power himself to lift up the pillars or obelisks or whatever you want to call them. And he fails at this, and Dooku repeatedly hits him with force lightning to make him angry and to make him hate him, which ends up working. Savage ends up getting enough power, tapping into that enough that he's able to accomplish the task. Not as well as Dooku, but he was able to, was far better than what he did before. And what stood out to me, Jay, is like how much this was like the mirror version of what Luke and Yoda did on Dagobah with the X-Wing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You know,
Definitely.
right down to Savage saying what you ask is impossible in this case, and then Dooku demonstrated how it's not impossible. But unlike Yoda, he just kept pushing him by making him angry by hitting him with Force lightning. Where Yoda just basically left it as like Luke says, "I can't believe it," and Yoda's response is, "Well, that's why you fail." In
Right.
that case, completely. So that's why I describe it as a mirror image of the saying.
That's perfect. And doesn't Dooku say something along the lines of the task is impossible only because you deem it so?
Yeah,
So it's kind of like Yoda saying only in your mind it is different.
Mhm.
you know.
That's a
Good
good
call.
catch. That's a very good catch there in that regard. But he vows to train Savage to, to hone him into a weapon that he can unleash into this galaxy. And with that, he dispatches him to Toydaria with the specific instruction of bringing King Katuunko back alive, because he's still smarting over when Katuunko refused him way back in the very first episode of the series, and joined the Jedi instead. And he gives him a clear instruction, which is bring him back alive. Like, that's important. We'll get to that here in a bit. Meanwhile, Anakin and Obi-Wan go to Dathomir. And look, it's not really my intent to go through this episode like beat by beat, but there's just so much that happens
Right.
that is important here that's worth discussing.
Mhm.
And they have two important meetings. One, they start off with the Nightbrothers because they're aware they're there. I did find it interesting that the Jedi knew as much about the Nightsisters, kind of touched on this earlier, but they knew about as much about the Nightsisters in Dathomir as they did before, because it kind of came off when Asajj, that's the problem with names being similar. When Asajj went back to that village after Dooku betrayed her, it was almost treated as like this mysterious thing, but Dooku had a contact from a past adventure that not everyone would know so much. So I'm wondering what's behind that. Did he share that information with the Jedi before he left the Order, or what is the Jedi's experience with the Nightsisters?
I'm thinking maybe Yoda had some experience at some point, only because the fact that he's been around so long,
Yeah.
and perhaps he and Mother Talzin at some point crossed paths for whatever reason. But yeah, I thought it was so great when they finally get to the Night Sister village, and Obi-Wan is warning Anakin about them. And Anakin, this is his first encounter, with the Night Sisters. And then he says, "Hey, you never know. I tend to be popular with the ladies."
Yeah, that's right. And Obi-Wan's response is like, "Yeah, don't I know it?" And which I'm glad you brought that up, because I didn't put it in my notes, but to me, that was kind of like a clue that Obi-Wan really to some degree, knows what's going on with Anakin and Padme under the
Sure.
surface. And
Mhm.
maybe not to the extent that they have that relationship, but looking ahead to season 7, at one point when Anakin's trying to call Padme on the, you do a holo transmission, and Rex is kind of guarding the door for him, and afterwards Anakin tries to blow the whole thing off, and then Obi-Wan just says to him, "Well, I hope you at least said hi to Padme for me." So,
So
yeah, I mean, so I think he's well, and it was not too long ago. What was the episode with Rush Clovis, when they were sending Padme over to kind of like pretend like she was going to rekindle that old flame, and there was that whole, Anakin made that remark, like, "Oh, I didn't know that they had a past relationship." And Yoda's response is, "Well, why would you know the romantic
exactly.
affairs of the center?" And then Obi-Wan in the corner just had that raised eyebrow.
Yep.
That's just, well, there's a few reactions in this show that just are classic. And, that one was great, and not too long ago when Ahsoka made that offhand remark to Padme, it's like, "You and Master Anakin think a lot alike. I guess that's why you get along so well."
Exactly.
Padme nearly chokes
Uh-huh.
after that. But
Few breadcrumbs here and there. And
yeah,
I think it's hilarious because I also think that that type of banter between Anakin and Obi-Wan, we've missed it, number 1, and it's,
right,
again, that well-placed humor that we've talked about, number 2. But also it's just one of those sort of unspoken jokes that Obi-Wan likes to go have his drinks and Anakin is great with the ladies. Because,
right.
in Attack of the Clones, when they're in the cantina looking for Zam Wesell, and Anakin just says, "Jedi business, go back to your drinks." That's like a big thing, I know, in the fandom, where all the girls in the bar were just like, "Ah." And I think they even said that in the book, if I'm not mistaken.
I'll have to go check that out. It's been a
Something
while
to
since I
that
read
extent.
that.
Yeah. Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
so funny.
But then, the Night Brothers, after their aggressive reception of Anakin and Obi-Wan, I mean, and it's really aggressive until Anakin gets up there and puts the blade to viscous, either kind of that threatening motion there, that he puts them on, tells them to go talk to Mother Talzin. And so they show up, And, Talzin just, well, come inside, and said, what is
Mhm.
it you want? And despite the fact that there's a couple of Nightsistrs with their energy bows behind them, they don't have that hard a time getting her to explain where Savage Oppress is. And she, uses her little force magic on that crystal ball and says, he's on Toyd area. And
Yep.
off they go. What'd you make of that?
Well, at first I was like, "Oh, okay. Why did she do that?" But then I thought, "Well, duh, it's because she wants Dooku out of the picture for their sake and Asajj's sake. So, of course she's going to spill the beans and tell them exactly where to find his apprentice so that it can eventually lead it back to him."
Yeah, and I also think and the more I'm thinking about it now, it's the follow-up scene where they leave, and then Talzin says to Asajj, "The moment's now. You got to go. You and Savage got to take out Dooku now." And it's
Mhm.
because the Jedi are now involved in this, and we got to get this wrapped up. And because if we don't, then that's going to bring them back to our doorstep. And that goes back to the conversation we've been having for the past 2 weeks, which is what is the motivation of the Nightsisters? And I really think they are isolationist in this
Mhm.
regards. They are
Mhm.
not, they've been described as also being in exile, but I don't think that really bothers Mother Talzin that much. She's
Mhm.
is she's told Dooku, it's like, I'm giving you this apprentice because I'm repaying a debt and then I never want to see you again.
Right. Yes.
And but she's also, we also know the real motivation is to help Asajj out in that regard. But she's not making any big designs for the galaxy. She's more interested in leading her clan and exploring their magic.
Yes, exactly. It's self-imposed exile. They are
Mhm.
happy being on their own little corner of the galaxy, and they just, as you pointed out, and I was gonna say that again too, is what she said to Dooku, that they just want to be left alone. Like, I never want to see you again. Okay. This is it. Bye.
Yeah. So then back on Toydaria, Savage arrives, and in that same fashion as when he attacked Deveron, except for now he's got more force powers at his disposal. He just charges into that the palace, and knocks everyone out of the way, throws Katuunko up against the wall, knocks him out, and then slung him over his shoulder when Anakin and Obi-Wan arrives. Um, I gotta tell you, this was, the brute strength. And then during the fight, when he's kind of being occupied by Anakin and Obi-Wan, and Katuunko makes a run for it, he uses the Force and snaps his neck in
Mhm.
that regard. So, what do you think? Was Savage being clumsy? Is he just that unrefined? What led to that moment and that decision on his part?
I think yes and yes. He is clumsy, he is not refined. Going back to what they said at the very beginning, he's still a reckless, impulsive animal. He was modified. He is not the same. He doesn't know his own strength. And I think that that's part of it too. I mean, these Toydarians are probably like little baby birds to him, and it
Mhm.
doesn't take much. And I don't even think it was a whoops moment. It was just an wasn't thinking moment. He was just lashing out with his power and his newfound power, and he just didn't really know how to focus it properly.
Yeah, yeah. He did not take the mission to heart as Dooku presented it to him. But then he makes his escape with Katuunko's body and brings it to uh, Dooku, who is furious with this. And, he shocks Savage, and that's when Asajj makes her appearance, and then she uses a little force touch to kind of snap him out of what he ever, not snap him out, but make him remember that his allegiance is to her. And so they begin the three-way fight. And we don't need to recount all the blows, except for it's a cool fight.
It
And
is very cool.
yeah, but the problem is that Asajj keeps ordering, make sure I said that right. Keeps ordering Savage to attack Dooku, but every time he goes to do so, man, it's hard to say all these names.
It
Every time he
is.
goes
You're
to do
doing
so,
well.
yeah, Dooku then hits him with force lightning, and he's like, he's too strong. And this is where Asajj loses her control with him, because she keeps insisting that he kill Count Dooku, but he can't. And so finally he turns on them both. with a very strong force choke. And it's kind of like he flips a switch, because we were just talking about him being like unrefined and clumsy before, but from like here on out, he's just leashing all kinds of power. When he goes into the hangar and he's fighting the droids, he's expertly parrying like all of their blaster bolts and the like. It's like he really did finally tack into the hatred that Dooku wanted him to, and it I hate to say this, but it made him all the better for it.
Mm-hmm. Well, as we're talking about this, so I'm sitting here wondering if he was almost put into sort of a haze purposely, even though when Mother Talzin gave him all of his prowess and his abilities and that type of thing, he was still very clouded. And then when Asajj comes in and like whoops him again, it kind of gives him a little bit of clarity in that way. But then it was almost like too much clarity, and they didn't anticipate him going the route that he did.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. I think what it was is that, he was expecting to serve Asajj in this way, and she was basically treating him like a disposable weapon in that regard. And so, yeah, he had some clarity, and then, it ratcheted up his anger to another level, and he was able to use the dark side that much more effectively as a
Right.
result.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy because Savage kind of is almost a triple agent. He's
Mhm.
Dooku's apprentice, but he's also Talzin's pawn. But yet he's Asajj's bridge to being able to destroy Dooku. And I mean, the guy was just basically everybody's tool, and he broke.
Indeed. And of course, Anakin and Obi-Wan show up in the middle of all this, and they're in the hangar, and all of a sudden they're surrounded by droids. But then at that point, Dooku had ordered the droids to destroy Savage Oppress because he was a traitor, and so they just kind of got ignored. Like, well, we're gonna leave.
Mhm.
No point in us hanging out around here.
Yes.
Yeah, and so the whole thing ends with Savage going back to Dathomir, finding Mother Talzin, and saying that, Asajj turned on me. What do I do now? And I found this interesting. She basically reveals that Maul's still out there at this point, and says that he's got the strength that you need. He'll teach you what you need to know to find your way in this galaxy. And he does that. She does that rather than like turn on him because he turned on Asajj. What do
Mhm.
you make of all that?
Well, yeah, I've thought about this quite a lot, and Talzin is really effective in that she's very much like Sidious in that she's playing more of a long game. But even though we said they want their own exile, I also think that they just want to put the exclamation point on it and not have to worry about any more meddling from the Sith. So it's almost like she's collapsing the rule of two from the inside.
Mm-hmm.
If she can get Savage to go join Maul and then perhaps, go back and get revenge on all of those who caused them, harm or whatever, that then she can accomplish things from afar that she maybe couldn't have otherwise. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think the other part of what's happening here is that, Maul is hers, and he is of Dathomir. And for all the talk we've heard that the Nightsistrs are dominant on Dathomir, that they control the males. At one point, Talzin says to Obi-Wan, we can't control the men. Well, we know that's not true. The men are very subservient to them, but it is just they invested their magic in Savage,
Mhm.
and it was not just to throw them away
Right.
in that regard. And so, and it's also an opportunity to maybe bring Maul home if everything goes well. So,
Mhm.
yeah, I think there's a bunch of different reasons for that, but it's also just kind of fun because with Talzin, it's like her reasons very much are her own, and I don't think we have to understand 100% what those are. She's a bit chaotic, and she likes throwing a wrench into all this other stuff. So,
Oh, yeah. She does it because she can. And I
indeed.
just love the fact that, she's one of the first or maybe the first character to operate kind of outside the Sith, but yet knows how to exploit them. You know what I mean? And it's
Mhm.
just, she can just do it however she wants to because, again, she can.
All right. Well, that gets us through the episode. Is there anything that we haven't touched on you want to bring up before we wrap it up?
Well, the only other thing that I was just really impressed with is some of the colors that were used in this episode. And I especially loved the training scene between Dooku and Savage because you had that yellow and black background that was very similar to Savage's markings. You know, his skin is yellow, his markings are black. And then you have that blood red of the lightsabers against that. And I just thought that that was a really, really cool way to use those colors.
Yeah, indeed. Indeed it was. So yeah, this was such a good trilogy episodes. I love revisiting it frequently. And we got some very interesting episodes coming up here as well in short order. That's going to generate all kinds of discussion. So, all right. Well, with that, just want to say thank you all for joining us for this episode of Podcast Stardust and this discussion of the Clone Wars and our ongoing rewatch series. We hope you've enjoyed it. And if so, please consider subscribing to the podcast if you haven't done so already. We're pretty much available on all the podcatchers that are out there. And if there's one that we're not on and you'd love us to be there, just let me know and I'll see what I can do to get us on that platform. I'd like to remind you, you can find all back episodes of the show over on retrozap.com, as well as the other shows, I should say, that are on the podcast network. And with that, Jay, you want to go ahead and remind everybody one more time what our social media contacts are and where else we can be reached across the internet.
Absolutely. We are very conveniently found on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust. And you can always check out all of our fun Pinterest pages with tons of ideas for everything Star Wars. And you can check us out on our 2 YouTube outlets as well. So if the other podcatchers aren't enough and you need more Podcast Stardust in your life, and who doesn't, you can hit us up on YouTube and YouTube Music. And if you'd like to drop us a line, you can do so at podcaststardust@gmail.com. And if you're looking for some new swag, maybe a t-shirt, maybe a sweatshirt, maybe some socks, maybe some athletic shorts, maybe a ball cap, you can get them all over on TeePublic. And the link to that is in our show notes. There's 7 different logos to pick from. And if you do pick up anything, thank you in advance because all of those purchases do help to support the show.
All right, Jay, you want to go ahead and remind everybody what's going on in cosplay?
Sure. So right now over on my Instagram, well, always you can catch me at j.snipscosplay. And I am Ahsoka from series of Clone Wars, seasons 3 through 5 specifically. And also my original concept Mandalorian, my 2 different versions of Hera, the 4th sister, and much, much more.
All right. This is normally where I'd tell you exactly what's coming up on the show, but I can't really do that because I don't know when things are happening, other than to say that we do have another episode in our The Force Awakens series coming up. And so it may be this same week or maybe next week. I haven't decided yet. It just depends on when we can get back to record and how you need to space episodes out to kind of keep the feed alive. So yeah, just be looking out for that. Some news episodes and the next installment in our Darth Bane book club sometime in the next couple weeks. So with that, just want to say thank you for listening to this episode of Podcast Stardust. Have a great week, whatever day of the week it is. And until next time, may the Force